All right. Well, I've got 4 o'clock, a little bit after 4 o'clock here on the East Coast, and very excited to welcome everyone back to our Wells Fargo Beyond College webinar series. This is actually webinar four for us here for the year, and today is all about preparing for a job interview. This is kind of the punch or counterpunch to a session that we hosted earlier this month focused on resume writing. So I know we have lots of folks that are returning back to hear about the interview topic today, and just so appreciative of everyone that's on the lines with us here for today. The next slide will just share a little bit of my contact information. My name is Dewey Norwood, very fortunate to serve as a relationship manager for work within our external engagement, which is a part of our diverse segments representation and inclusion team, or DSRI. So excited to be on today. And my daughter reminds me constantly, this is my Jordan year in banking. So this is my 23rd year. So we got to make sure that we win a championship somehow, some way through the work that we're doing. So you'll see my LinkedIn contact information here. Please feel free to contact me at any time. Hey, we always love to start with something topical. And this is an important piece that I would ask everyone to reference. And the headline reads, Standing with Asian American and Pacific Islander Communities. And this is actually some comments from our CEO, Charlie Scharf, relative to some of the recent violence and things that have been happening specifically around the Asian community. And I do want to read Charlie's quote that's here, and it's just simply reads, "This is unacceptable, and we stand with our Asian colleagues and communities. We will continue to work diligently to take action against racism and injustice." And so I would encourage everyone that's on the lines with us today to go back and visit this information posted on our Wells Fargo Stories channel and learn a little bit more. I also want to quickly note that Noelle Harmon, our wonderful CEO of API Scholars, actually has a similar piece. And I think we're going to drop that into the chat here in just a moment for you to see around this important topic. And so certainly something that we thought was relevant here for today and something that we wanted to begin the call with. All right, as we continue on, I think we'll spend just a moment or so talking about what the run of program looks like for today. So we've kind of touched on the in the news component already. And I want to mention this reminder. Please remember, scholars, this is a safe space. This is a space where you can ask the tough questions of us, where you can present things in a way that you know they're going to be held in confidence. And so if there are questions that you have throughout the course of today, please just know that as you present those, we're never going to read your name, we're never going to share your information, but feel confident that you can submit those questions in a safe type of an environment. We'll certainly give you some tips around the Zoom etiquette, which I know everyone on the lines is very, very familiar with the importance of proper etiquette as we're working here through Zoom. And then we'll also ask you just to continue to submit questions to us. Scholars, we have gotten tons and tons of questions. That's going to help to refine some of the content that our presenters will be sharing today. But we have a ton of questions that we're going to be covering throughout the course of today's discussion. But in the interim, if something comes up for you, go ahead and submit those questions real time over to Nicole David. You'll see Nicole's information here on the screen. Again, our wonderful partner there from API Scholars, who will also be facilitating the Q&A portion of the discussion. From a programmatic standpoint, we're going to talk about behavioral interviews. We're going to talk about the questions you should be anticipating. We're going to talk about virtual or Skype or interviews that may take place over the phone, and also the importance of engaging. And then what do you do after the show? The interview is complete. Now, what are the next steps that need to take place? So we'll touch on all of those pieces. And then when we get to the end, we'll give you some reminders, give you certainly an opportunity to complete our survey to give us feedback. And then we'll talk about some of the outreach. I'm really excited about the second bullet on the bottom. We have all of our content now on our wonderful API Scholars YouTube channel. So you can actually go out there, visit that channel, and then be able to access all of the content for any of the presentations. And don't forget to get social with us. You can use that hashtag WFC Beyond College. Again, hashtag WFC Beyond College if you'd like to share feedback with us or share this information with others that may benefit from it. So that's where we're headed, and we promise that we'll get you out of here as close to the top of the hour as we can with things. As we transition on, certainly want to take a moment to, again, remind you of some of the Zoom etiquette pieces. Of course, there's the different settings here where you can see all of the views in one. If you want to have it on a speaker view, all ways that you can just kind of click the link there in the upper right-hand corner of your screen to make those adjustments where you need to. And again, don't forget to submit those questions confidentially to Nicole, David, and team throughout the course of today's presentation. So there's some quick Zoom etiquette for you, all things that you know very, very well, but some things that we just wanted to revisit just very briefly. All right, and as we move on, we need to get to the real stars of the show, of today's show. Really excited to have Shalane Colbert on, wonderful partner of ours from our Wells Fargo Asset Management Group, and also Tarina Matthews Davis, a wonderful partner from our Corporate and Investment Bank. And so these leaders are going to be the partners that will share great information with you for today. So Shalane, Tarina, so excited to have you all on the lines with us and looking forward to what's going to be, I think, a really, really exciting discussion around things. But if it's okay, team, I want to share some quick metrics here, and the scholars have outdone themselves again. We have 552 registrations as of about a half an hour ago when I looked up our latest metrics on things. So 552, another great number from that perspective. Certainly want to shout out our #1 colleges here. So the University of Nebraska at Omaha, UNO continues to outperform. It's every broadcast, they are just right at the top. So congratulations, UNO, for another great showing here. Bowie State also in our top contenders here for this month. And then also University of Richmond and also Baruch College. So a lot of love there for Richmond, and then our wonderful folks there out of Baruch up in New York. So wonderful things there. Also, this is a first-time report. We also have a report out now on high schools. So, and I hope that I'm pronouncing this correctly, but Mark Keppel High School, and forgive me, Mark Keppel fans, if I'm saying it incorrectly, but Mark Keppel High School, and then also John Bone High School. And so got the high schoolers checking in for us now to get content. And then last but not least, juniors and seniors, you guys are really close for relative to the number of registrations, great numbers, both from juniors and seniors today. And then our top 3 finishers for our strategic partners connecting in with the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, APIA Scholars, and also TMCF. So team, I think we've got some great folks that are on the lines with us here for today, and I think it's going to be a really exciting conversation. So Shalane, want to hand the reins over to you and to Tarina for our next steps from here. So just excited about today's conversation.
Thank you, Dewey, for the wonderful introduction, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. We are thrilled to share tips and best practices to help prepare you for your next job interview. As Dewey mentioned, I'm Shalane Colbert. I'm a business support manager with Wells Fargo Asset Management. I'm based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've been with Wells Fargo for about 8 years. And in my role, I have the pleasure of helping my business to execute on initiatives around HR processes, recruiting, hiring, early talent, training, developing. I manage our analysts in our analyst development program, and also the interns that support our business. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tarina for her introduction.
Thank you, Shalane and Dewey. Hello, everyone. My name is Tarina Matthews Davis, and I work, as Dewey indicated, in the Corporate and Investment Bank, where I manage all of our DEI programs and initiatives for the Corporate Investment Bank. I've been at Wells Fargo almost 2 years, and I'm located here in Charlotte. And I'm excited to be with you all today and to share my thoughts on how you can prepare and successfully execute an interview.
Great. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We want this webinar to be interactive. So we have a polling question on the next slide that we're going to launch. And we'll give you a little bit of time to answer the question, which is, when was your last job interview? Your options are in the last 30 days, within 1 to 3 months ago, 3 to 6 months, more than a year ago, or more than 5 years. And we'll give you some time to make your selection, and then we'll see where most people land. All right. Okay, so the majority is in more than a year ago, and then there's an even mix with the other options. So we have some people, maybe 18% or so, that have interviewed in the last 30 days. So maybe this information is fresh, or we can give you tips to help you on your next interview. We'll move on to the next slide. All right, let's dive right in and discuss behavioral interviewing. So what is behavioral interviewing? Many companies leverage behavioral interviewing during their hiring process to determine which candidate is the best fit for their positions. The types of questions asked in a behavioral interview are based on the idea that situations in your past and how you performed in those situations are a pretty good indicator of how you will perform in the future and whether or not you will be successful in the role. Your responses to the questions can be from prior internships, other work experience, school projects, participation in clubs or organizations, or other leadership experiences. In this interview style, you should expect open-ended questions as well as probing follow-up questions from your interviewer. The recruiter or hiring manager will push you to explore the details surrounding your knowledge, skills, and experience. This style allows them to get responses that demonstrate whether you have the skills or competencies they desire for that position. So get comfortable with being probed to give more details, and that's usually an indicator that you might not be providing enough detail or responding to the question. So just follow the probes and provide more information. And regardless of the interview format, whether it's by telephone, in person, or video conference, you still want to have some structure around how to answer behavioral style questions. The recommended structure is called the STAR method, which is an acronym for situation, task, action, result. Situation or task, tell me about a time. Describe for me an example. This is really storytelling. Action, focus on your involvement in the story and provide details relevant to your actions and how you resolve the situation. When describing action, it's really important to make sure that you focus on what you actually did in the scenario. Sometimes it can get a little tricky if you're using a class project or an example that involves a team or other people, but you still always want to bring it back to what did you do in the situation? What were your actions? And the result, you want to tie up the question and close the loose ends on it's important to provide the outcome for your scenario or situation. What's the end result? And it's also very important to make sure that the story or scenario that you're talking through, that it makes sense and it's sequential and it's easy for your interviewer to follow along. So don't get too far in the details to where you're kind of rambling or going off the rails, but just make sure that you're answering your responses in a brief manner, but also provide enough detail for the interviewer to follow along. Now we'll move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about anticipating the questions. Oh, I may have gone too far. Sorry about that. Go back a few. My apologies. Getting ahead of myself. We're going to talk about preparing for the behavioral-based interview. So you want to know, how can an interviewee prepare for an interview? Here's some best practices that you can follow. First, you want to analyze the position that you are interviewing for. And by analyze, I mean review the job description. It's key. It will outline exactly what they are looking for in candidates that are applying to the job posting. Wells Fargo posts required and desired qualifications for their positions, as well as some of the job responsibilities. This information can be seen as clues that can help you gain insight into the types of questions you might be asked in your interview. When companies use language in their job description like strong analytical skills, good attention to detail and accuracy, ability to interact with all levels of an organization, strong time management, these are all skills and competencies that the interview questions will likely focus on. So you want to evaluate your background and reflect on those experiences to answer the questions. So take the information from the job posting and connect it with your past experiences And this will help you figure out how you might be able to set yourself apart from other candidates. Understanding yourself and your experience and being able to tie those skills to the job description will help you demonstrate to the interviewer that you have the required skills to be successful in the job. You want to create brief star stories prior to the interview. Use the skills mentioned in the job description to help you determine which scenarios to speak to those competencies. For example, if the job description states strong customer service skills, you may want to speak to past work experience where you demonstrated stellar customer service. I won't mention any names, but I can think of one fast food chain that has a very efficient order taking process and offers consistently friendly service. I'll give you a hint. After they take your order, they say, "My pleasure."
My pleasure. And they're closed on Sunday as I drive by, like, oh snap, I forgot they
That's the
closed
one.
today.
So you want to pull together or recall situations where you're talking about any situation where you've given outstanding customer service. You could have been employee of the month. You could receive consistently high survey scores from customers or feedback that you're always given outstanding customer service. So you want to think through some scenarios that talk about those skills. And as you're planning it out, use that STAR format. Talk about the situation, task, what were your actions, and what is the end result. Going in prepared to an interview will give you the confidence that you need to do well. Also, another thing to try to do is to try to give different stories for different questions. One example, so I overcame a difficult situation. There are many stories and answers that you could use that may even apply to other competencies to answer a question along those lines. So it may depend on where you want to focus your actions and the outcome. So if you're thinking about overcoming a difficult situation, you could talk about maybe a teamwork example where maybe you didn't have teammates that were pulling their weight. You could talk about a problem-solving issue where you actually really had to think something through or look at it from different angles to come up with the right solution. Or you can use take an initiative. You know, something wasn't being done and you stepped in and made sure that it got done. So you want to describe or think of different scenarios that speak to how you overcame a difficult situation, but it also ties to those different competencies that I mentioned, and there are probably others. It's all based on how you decide that you're going to tell that story to answer that question. And you want to be really specific in your examples, but like I said, it's key to answer it clearly and concisely. Try not to ramble. Sometimes it's easy to ramble, especially if you're nervous in an interview, but make sure that the scenario you're using or the situation is easy to follow. And also I want to mention, don't confuse creating stories with being dishonest or creating a lie. Seasoned interviewers can tell if you're embellishing and you don't want to do that. Integrity is very important. Also, preparation and practice are critical and can lead to successful interviews. Just like an athlete training that's putting in long hours on the field or gym, you have to practice interviewing in order to be great at it. So utilize your career center at school, participate in mock interview events, find an interview partner, and the key is practice, practice, practice. And also be conversational and try not to sound too rehearsed. Well, now that we have an idea on what behavioral interviewing is and how to deliver responses using the STAR method, let's take a deeper dive into figuring out how interviewers, what they're actually asking. So we're going to move on to anticipating the questions. And this was the section I was really excited to get to as well. Remember, the interviewer is looking to assess your skills and core competencies for the job. So on this slide, there are several different core competencies. I'm clearly not going to go over all of them. I'll just pick a couple and talk through those. Let's look at communication. So communication, every hiring manager, every company wants to know, how well do you communicate? You know, whether the job is for something like you're working in a call center and you're going to be taking calls over the phone all day long. Do you speak clearly through the phone? Is the person on the other end able to hear you clearly and understand what you're saying? And are you able to also listen to what the customer is asking for and translate that into providing some level of customer service? But not only is verbal communication important in this scenario, if you're in a role where you actually have to document details about the call, it's also important to have good written communication so that someone else, in case they have to review the call later or it's escalated and they have to step in, they can follow along to what you discussed with the customer. So communication is key. And communication is one of those competencies that it may not come in the form of a question, but you're always being evaluated on your communication skills in an interview. So just be mindful of that. And it's important to try not to use verbal crutches like or and trying to use certain words or phrases such as like or you know. So practice with somebody, a partner, and try not to do those. And maybe even have, like, if you have a game with the buzzer, you can have the person on the other end buzz you every time you use a crutch phrase or a word, and it will help you start to listen for that and try to avoid it. Let's look at another one on here. How about teamwork? Organizations are made up of teams, and it's important that you work well with others and that you support and assist your teammates in achieving common goals or getting the work done. Also remember, if you don't have work examples, you can use other examples, class projects, student clubs, and organizations to talk through kind of how you exhibit teamwork. I'll let you look at the rest on your own time, so we'll move on to the next slide. And here we're just going to cover anticipating the questions. So on previous slides, I mentioned employers will give you clues on what they're looking for, whether it's through the job description, and you just have to kind of figure out how to decode that information in preparation for the actual interview. This slide helps to walk you through with examples on how to anticipate the questions. These are real qualifications you would see on one of our postings. So you have to decide basically on this, so you'll have the qualification in one column, and then in the second column, there's the competency. And then we give you tips on how you might be able to anticipate how to respond to that qualification or speak to that competency. So let's take initiative, the competency that has initiative. The qualification might be, do you exhibit the ability to take initiative and work independently with minimal supervision in a structured environment? How you should prepare for this type of question is to think about a time you had multiple competing priorities and you independently completed tasks with minimal supervision or not being told to do so. You want to describe how you might have jumped right in and started working on a project or a task that you knew had to be done, but like I said, no one asked you to actually do it. You were just proactive and took initiative to get it done. You want to talk through a brief scenario by giving that description or scenario, talking through the situation, the tasks, your actions, and the end results. Now let's move on to the next slide. On this slide, we're going to give some more examples of behavioral questions. Since I talked about initiative on the last one, we'll move with that one. We'll work with that one. So this one might be, a question might be, tell me about a time that you independently implemented a new solution when others were waiting to be directed to do it. I'll give you an example of kind of why that's important in a job. So you might be reporting to someone, a lot of our managers are really busy. There's not always someone that's going to give you, okay, Shalane, I need you to go do this. And then you check back or something, especially if you're an intern and they tell you another project. As time goes by, you'll be able to figure out kind of what needs to be done. There may be a report that is due every week and it's Friday at noon and that report is due. You might be able to help out or pitch in and work on that report. You might be able to ask a colleague, how can you help? So it's important that managers feel like there's somebody that's not sitting at their desk, twiddling their thumbs, waiting for direction to do something else next. that you actually will jump right in or take initiative to get the job done. And you don't have to always be directed to do so. You don't take a lot of supervision. That's very important. So that's a great skill to have. So think about some situations where you might have done that. Another one would be, I like the teamwork example. I feel like teamwork is one of those things that's also critical in any work environment. And so if you don't have previous work experience, like I said, you can talk through a class assignment or project. So here's an example. I'm going to talk through the STAR method and give you an example of how I might respond to a question about teamwork. So I had a class assignment in a group with 3 other teammates, and I volunteered to be the leader and delegated tasks to be completed weekly. One team member was not submitting work on time, and I noticed that the team member was disengaged, so I decided to set up a meeting to discuss missing project deliverables. It turned out the team member was having difficulty understanding the assignment and was too embarrassed to ask. So I explained the project in more detail and provided resources that could be used to complete the work. As a result, the team member was more engaged with the team, understood their role, and then started submitting quality work on time. We were able to complete the project on time and got a good grade on our assignment. All right, and now I think we're going to move on to the next slide. This one is the question that is typically at the beginning of a job interview. It may start off with, tell me about yourself. So on this slide, here's a few tips and best practices to kind of walk through that. Interviewing can be challenging, and even the most experienced interviewer often gets nervous. But the good news is, with preparation and practice, you will feel more comfortable going into an interview. So if you get the question about, tell me about yourself, it's good to have in mind a 60-second commercial, which is also called an elevator pitch. And that basically is the premise that if you're riding an elevator with the CEO of a company, do you have a 60-second soundbite about yourself that would give them a clear picture of maybe who you are, what your background is, what your experience is, what you're looking for in a role or opportunity, what you're passionate about? You want to kind of figure out that elevator pitch and have it handy to use at all times, whether it's an interview, it could be a networking event for a super day or something along those lines. So practice and develop your little 30-second or 60-second elevator pitch. And that's a good way to start off with the question of, tell me about yourself. Really, with the tell me about yourself, you really also want to speak to your KSAs, which are your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. And what will make you stand out from other candidates. You want to explain why you're a good fit for the role. Also, when you're nervous, if you don't have kind of the elevator pitch and you don't know how to speak to your abilities, sometimes people will start looking at their resume or running through every detail on their resume. You really don't want to do that. You only want to highlight a few key transferable skills or experiences that align to the job opportunity. One thing I'll touch on is I did review, there were a lot of pre-submitted questions, which is great, and we'll get to more questions at the end. But a lot of people had a question about how do they respond to the what are your strengths or what are your weaknesses question. So every time I go into a job interview, I always have a list in my mind, a mental list of what are my 3 to 5 top strengths. But you also want to pick out key strengths that align to the job. You want to speak to those skills or strengths that actually translate into the role, so that you're connecting the dots for the interviewer about how you're a good fit, how you meet the qualifications. And so relevance is very key here. Now with weaknesses, that's a tricky one. I think everybody can probably figure out 3 to 5 of their strengths, but speaking about weaknesses, I'll give you another thing that I usually do and kind of a rule of thumb. If possible, it's not always the case, but it's helpful. If you can think of a weakness that also kind of has a positive spin on it, that's a good one. So for example, one thing I used to say, and this was actually really true, I'm extremely detailed. And so sometimes you can focus too much on the details, which could be a drain on your time, could slow down your work. So that's the kind of the negative of it and could be viewed as a weakness, but it's also a positive if you're really, or care about the accuracy of your work and you pay attention to the details. So that's one of the things that, you don't want to be slow and always, producing work, but at the same time, you want to demonstrate that you're conscientious about being accurate and the details. Another one I could think about was maybe you have a difficult time saying no. And sometimes the negative of that is that you can get overwhelmed. You can take on too many tasks that you don't have time to complete. So it's, and another one that's kind of related to that is you have a hard time delegating. These are all ones that I've worked on over the years. Delegating is another thing that it's a really good skill when you develop it and you have it and you use it when appropriate. But it also shows the positive in that is that you actually like to take ownership for your work and you like to see projects through from beginning to the end. But it's important to leverage your colleagues and use them when needed. So delegation could kind of, you struggle with delegation could be a weakness. So I hope that helps, and we'll talk through some more at the end if you have questions. Now, Dick, next slide, Tarina and I are going to do a little role play. Tarina, are you ready?
Already.
Okay. And in this role play, I'm going to act as the interviewer, and Tarina is going to be the candidate. Thank you for coming in, Tarina. So it's great to meet you. So just tell me about yourself and why you're interested in this role.
Okay, so I was born in a small town in Ohio. I have 4 siblings. I am from a single parent family. Let's see, what else can I tell you about myself? I am a junior in college. Today I'm a finance major. I'm thinking about maybe changing it to accounting. I'm still trying to figure that out. What was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
Why are you interested in the role?
Well, I've heard really good things about Wells Fargo, and as I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do in my career, and Wells Fargo was the first company to come to campus. I just decided, let me apply to Wells Fargo and see what happens from there.
Okay. Thanks, Tarina. Now on to some other questions. We're going to stop there with that role play because she gave us so much to work with. So we're going to critique why those were not good responses to the lead in tell me about yourself question and why are you interested in the role. I'm sure you have your own ideas why, but Tarina and I will talk through why those were not good responses. One, she started off with some really personal details, which try to stay away from if you can. Now, of course, people want you to bring your authentic self to the interview and want to get to know things about you. But in all reality, does the interviewer care if you have 4 siblings or, maybe where you were born? Sometimes you could connect and it's like building rapport if maybe the interviewer is also from the same location. But it's details that aren't really relevant to help me figure out if you're a good candidate for this role or not. Another one, she sounds really indecisive. And we might all be when it comes to picking your major in school, nothing wrong with that. But I don't know y'all want to tell an interviewer that I kind of am struggling figuring things out. Tarina, what else would you say were some, and you use a lot of verbal crutches, but what are some other things that you would point out that we want to avoid in interviews?
I would say the use of I used a lot of them, and then I had to ask you, to repeat your question, so I wasn't fully paying attention to the question that you were asking me, and I was really pulling out the fact that I was indecisive, and clearly that's not the reason to answer to a company as to why you applied for their position.
Right. And we could have kept going, but for the sake of time, we'll keep moving along because I almost wanted to ask her to go through a STAR question, but she gave me too much to work with on that role play. So on the slide that's currently on our screen, Here's a good example of a tell me about yourself that is more concise, it's more clear. The candidate is really telling you about them and their experience and kind of some extracurricular activities. I won't read it to you, but it's there so that you can see what a good example is like. And now I'm going to turn it over to Tarina, and she's going to cover interviewing etiquette.
Well, thank you so much, Shalane. And next slide, please. I want to just share that, in these times of COVID and video virtual interviewing, it is important that you are dressed appropriately, in this case, from head to toe. There have been situations where fire alarms have gone off and people have had to stand up, and then you're exposed on whatever is on the bottom. So to get yourself in the mode of this is an interview, imagine you're face to face, you want to be fully dressed head to toe. Also, it's important that you speak clearly and concisely. And important to me as a potential interviewer is what Shalane brought up, is the STAR method. I was sharing with the group before we got officially started with you all that I do the STAR method so much, and I'm looking for the STAR method when I'm talking to people. I actually use it in my daily life. So here's the situation that I'm encountering. Here's the task. This is the action that I'm requiring. And ultimately, here's the result. What we don't want is for you to be a television show and leave us with a cliffhanger. So always give the interviewer your situation, your tasks, your actions, and your results. Make sure that you have a clear background, free of distractions, and limit the amount of background noise if possible. We all know, for those of us who have dogs in particular, when the Amazon person delivers and rings that doorbell, I don't know about anybody else, but my dog goes crazy. So if you can make sure that you are scheduling your interviews potentially around your Amazon delivery times, or that you're ready to quickly hit the mute button, or just share up front with your interviewer that this may happen. I think that everyone now in these COVID days, we're used to dogs barking, children in the background, but as much as you can limit that as possible, that would be most ideal. Additionally, during these times, next slide, as we talk about engaging the interviews, you want to always smile through your answers. Let the interviewer nod your head, smile. Let the interviewer know that you're engaging with him or her. During these times of COVID and virtual face-to-face interviews happening more frequently, it's important that you take every opportunity to engage where possible. So these are times when companies are truly gauging for fit. And some of that that relates to your nonverbal gestures match to what you're saying. So for example, if you say, "Oh, I'm really excited about this opportunity," my nonverbals are not really matching what I'm saying. But if you're smiling, you're saying, "I'm really excited that you took the time out to speak with me today. Let me give you some examples as to why I'm the perfect fit for your role." Your nonverbals are matching exactly what you're saying. So you want to make sure that you're aligned in that perspective. Remember that you are always participating in an interview. From the time that camera comes on, you are being interviewed. So again, how you manage through the distractions. For example, right now, my dog may bark at any moment. Right now, he is sitting in the corner growling for, I have no idea why, but that's what he's doing. Fortunately, you all cannot handle it, cannot hear it. But it's how I manage through that distraction that speaks to the interviewer, because that also sends a message as how you manage through difficulties that you may encounter in the workplace. So the next slide. So when you're closing the interview, you always want to be prepared with questions. The worst thing that a candidate can do to a recruiter is say, "I have no questions." That sends the message that you're not prepared, that you have not researched the job, that you have not researched that job description, you have not researched the company. So you always want to be prepared with some questions. Asking questions also sends a message to the interviewer that you have done your research, that you are detail oriented, and that you do have good follow through. You want to always ask, you want to have one question that's always standard. What is the process? Like, what is the timeline? When should I expect to hear back from you if it's the hiring manager and or the recruiter? So that minimally, that could be one of your standard questions that you ask. And always remember, people like to talk, like to hear themselves speak. They like to talk about their own experience. So another question that I would offer to you to have as your standard is, you mentioned that you've been with the organization for X number of years. What keeps you with the organization? When you ask such a question like that to the person, that demonstrates that you are A, listening to their introduction, and B, you're interested in knowing their insights and their experience with the organization. And finally, as I said from the beginning, never say, no, I have no questions. This again can inadvertently communicate that you are not listening or you believe that you know it all. And none of us want to do that. So you always want to close your interview by summarizing your strengths and why you're the perfect candidate for this role. I thank you for taking the time to speak to me today. I believe that my experience and my coursework that I've taken in finance and accounting make me a value add to immediately hit the ground running with your position within Wells Fargo. That summarizes what you've identified as your strength. It shows that you've tied your academic curriculum to the position and that you've done the research on the position. And that's just an example of, how you would close out an interview. Next slide, please. And then for follow-up, right? Okay, so here's the deal. I believe that rejection is the best way to help us develop our resilience. So we're not going to always get every job that we apply for. And sometimes you can look at it, well, that just wasn't the role for me. Like there's something greater. I know people think that's cliche, but you can think there's something greater for me. There's something else waiting for me. Or maybe you get multiple job offers, right? But in the current litigious society that we're in, companies are not permitted to give specific feedback other than we're moving forward with another candidate, right? That's going to be the party line that you likely receive. If you do receive communication that opens the door for further feedback, for further communication for feedback on you personally, then follow up on that and request time on that person's calendar to get that specific feedback. You may or may not get that, but if you do have that opportunity, the door is open for you. Make sure that you walk through that door. It's important, though, that you send an email to all of your interviewers, thanking them for the time. And when you send that, don't try to avoid a generic email that goes to everybody. You want that thank you to be very personal to the person who you spoke with. So if I spoke to Shalane and we talked about my how I overcame an obstacle, I want to say thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I hope that my experience in sharing how I overcame obstacles really resonated with you, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future. That shows that I remember the conversation with Shalane. It may also help me stand out because we don't know how many people Shalane had to speak with. So it helps me stand out as a candidate. And at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do. Make sure that you stand out with your interviewers amongst all the other candidates that they're speaking with. In your thank you emails, again, you want to make them specific, avoid generic thank you notes, and ask them, if the recruiter does not give you each of your interviewers' names or email addresses, then you can send it to the recruiter and ask them to forward it along. But I want you to know, I want to be very clear. If you interview with an interview panel, so there are 2 or 3 people that interview at the same time, or maybe you have back-to-back interviews with multiple people, they're coming together to talk about you. And they're all going to say either I received a thank you note from Tarina or I did not. So you want to make sure that whatever you do, it's consistent amongst all of your interviewers, because they're going to say, well, wait a minute, I didn't receive any. Oh, you received a thank you. I didn't receive a thank you. And you just don't want to find yourself in that situation. And so then you want to make sure that as the recruiter says to you, okay, well, you can expect to hear from us in 5 to 7 days. You want to see clarity. Is that 5 business days or 5 to 7 calendar days, inclusive of Saturdays and Sundays? So you want to make sure before you end that call with the recruiter that you have your clear marching orders as to when you should expect to hear back and what are the next steps in the process. Next slide, please. And again, so what happens after the interview? What if you get the no? You want to stay positive. You want to be professional. but take your time, what I say to myself, I'm going to give myself a 1-day pity party where I'm going to go to Dairy Queen. I'm going to eat all the ice cream that I want to eat for that particular day. If I'm going to have my sad tears, I'm going to have my crocodile tears. You just give myself 12 hours to do that. Pity party for one right here. And then I'm going to get back on the horse and say, that wasn't the role for me. Now, what do I need to do to go on to the next role? So always remain positive, but take that time to have that grieving moment, because that might not have been the role for you. You still want to maintain relationship as a recruiter if you can stay in contact with them. Should they have other opportunities that they might want to consider you for? How you end that relationship with that recruiter really sends a message as to future consideration for open roles. Because the recruiter and the interviewers might say, wow, he or she was so professional, took it so well. And if another role comes up, they're like, you know what, I want to go back to that person. So you want to always maintain professionalism, even during the no. Next slide, please. So here's a quick do's and don'ts, and I'm not going to insult your intelligence by reading all of them, but the do's: make sure that you're on time for your interview. Make sure you know if your interview is on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype, right? Make sure you practice the STAR method: the situation, the task, the action, and the result. Again, make sure you're dressed from head to toe just for that day. I know you've all seen the commercial where I think it's the coffee commercial, where the guy was only dressed from the waist down, but his camera was facing and everyone could see his boxers. You don't want that to be you, okay? Remember, and what not to do. Don't forget your location of your interview. Don't forget the time of your interview. Don't look disheveled and rushed, and prepare for the worst. Technology is not always our friend. So make sure, it happened to me. I can openly share with you all. As soon as this call started, all of a sudden my Zoom wanted to update on my computer. And so you have to get on early, prepare all of your technology. Don't forget to practice your behavioral interviews and your 30-second elevator speech. You should have, you can almost guarantee that they're going to say, tell me about yourself. And you don't want to be the candidate that I was earlier with Shalane, providing way too much information that's personal and not enough information or knowledge of the organization or the job for which I was applying. Please don't ramble, and please, whatever you do not answer at the end of your answer, say to your interviewer, did I answer your question? They're never going to say yes or no, right? So you have to demonstrate that confidence. And that's another do. Demonstrate the confidence. I always tell people, just be confident. You might be confidently wrong, but just be confident, okay? And then come prepared with well thought out questions to ask your interviewer at the end of that interview. Next slide. So the way that you can practice and implement what we've talked about today: set up mock interviews with people that you trust. Set up mock interviews with your career services staff, with your friends, your parents, right? They don't have to know the topic, but give them, and you guys are much more technologically savvy than I am. You can Google potential behavioral interview questions. If you set up mock interviews with your peers or your parents, tell them, educate them on the STAR method. I find it, when I educate someone else on what I'm looking for, that helps me to practice it even more. When I teach somebody, then it is more ingrained in my brain. My mom has been my best cheerleader and my best, critic in all of this. So even to this day, when I'm interviewing for a role, I always use my mom and my husband from a personal standpoint. And then I also use some of my peers to help me as well. So I would encourage you all to do that. Google behavioral-based questions and sample answers to familiarize yourself. But again, you don't want to sound rehearsed. You want to sound genuine and authentic. All of this, use it as a lesson and an opportunity to grow yourself. Take the feedback that you may receive as a gift. Remember that feedback is a gift. And I always liken it to, this feedback is the gift like I get as a holiday present. That is truly somebody who knows me. Or, this feedback it's an okay gift, but I think I'm going to regift it. Or, this feedback is from someone who does not know me at all, and I'm not going to receive it. You have to determine how you want to process that feedback. All of it is to help you learn and to grow. Thank you.
Wow, panelists, ton of good information there, and lots of topics. Candidly, some of the things that we saw coming in through the questions that the scholars were providing, and even some new topics there. So, and I put in my DQ order also there, Tarina. So, you guys can work on my peanut butter parfait with pecans added in there. So that's like the special, the Norwood special, and every once in a while some caramel. But with that said, we got to get down into our Q&A portions of things. So quickly, Nicole, want to hand the reins over to you and thank you for all of your great work and the API Scholars team for all that you all are doing. You have a hard task. We have at least 100 questions that have come in, and we've got, I'm going to say 10-ish minutes to get them all in. So I'm glad this one is on you, my friend. We're going to let you take the reins and pick the diamonds there to be able to present to our distinguished panel. Such great information. Nicole, we'll give it to you from here.
Thank you, Dewey. And it's
welcome
with everybody today. I'm going to jump right in because, as Dewey said, we do have a lot of questions and we're running a bit short on time. So one question that I've seen come in a couple of times is, how during an interview do you talk about gaps in your work history? And what's the best way to handle that?
Okay, I can take that one, and Tarina, feel free to chime in. So a lot of times there's very good explanations for gaps in your employment history. So if you're a student, it could be that you re-enrolled in classes, or you took a full course load and you're not able to work while you're also going to school. There could also be personal reasons, which I don't advise you to give too many details on your personal reasons. You really don't want to do that. You could just say, I took a break, I took time away. I focused on something else, and then I decided to go back into the workforce. You can give reasons without going too far into details that can explain gaps. And that's one of the questions I rarely ask, because I feel like it does kind of open up a can of worms. There could be health reasons, there could be personal reasons. I really don't want that type of information to come into the process. And it's kind of like, if you put it out there, you can't take it back. Tarina, any tips you have on how to answer that question?
I agree with everything you said. The one thing that I would say is make sure that you answer the question, that you provide the information up front. Try to preempt the question. If you have a gap in your resume and you don't share it, you're allowing people to create a story for you. You don't want anyone else to create your story for you. So, for example, several of my girlfriends took time off because they were raising their babies. And so they put on their resume, stay-at-home mom. So they filled in the gap for us. It's unfortunate, but let's just be clear. Sometimes recruiters go immediately to the negative. So you don't want anybody to create the story for you. You want to put it out there. So whatever you were doing, for example, my husband took time out of his professional career because he started an entrepreneurial business. We put that on his resume when he decided that he wanted to go back to work. So whatever you do to fill up that time, make sure that you put it out there.
That's really great news. I don't know that I would have thought of that myself, so that's great. The other question that actually just came in, I think it's a good one, is references. A lot of jobs you have to provide a couple references. What makes a good reference? And do you have to present this when you're at in the interview, be it virtual or in person?
Tarina, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I would say with references, you don't provide references until you're asked for them. So probably that's likely not going to come up until they're in the offer stage. So you don't want to give more information that's requested of you. So, and then I think there was a question in the chat about, the types of references. Make sure that you're providing a reference associated with the job that you're applying for. I wouldn't provide all professional references, people that I've never worked for. I try to give all 3 references that are professional from the various organizations that I've worked with. And that sends a message that in every organization that I've worked, someone would hire me back to that organization.
I don't have anything to add on that one.
Thank you. Right, another question, they're just rolling in. Is it appropriate to take notes during the interview? Like when the interviewers are introducing themselves, when they explain the company and position, or when they answer your questions at the end of the interview?
Yes. Like Tarina mentioned, if you're going to send a thank you note, you want to know who you spoke to and who you met with. It's very appropriate to write down everyone you meet. I mean, it's very easy. People say their introductions and their names really quickly. So definitely write it down. Feel comfortable enough to ask them again or ask for the appropriate spelling, the proper spelling of their name. Definitely take notes especially if you're trying to keep on track, because there might be questions that come up as someone is talking through a role, or even if they ask you a question and you kind of have a tendency to kind of lose your train of thought, it will help you pull your response back on track. So I strongly encourage taking notes during the interview.
And to add to Shalane's point, I would say make sure that you're telling the interviewer that you're saying, is it okay if I take notes? Because that way, when you're looking down or looking away, it doesn't look like you're not paying attention, so that they know up front. And likely the interviewer will say to you, I'm going to take a couple notes. So it's important that you as a candidate are okay with the silence in the fact that the interviewer might be writing down notes or even taking notes on their computer.
And team, this is Dewey, just real quickly on this. I love the notion there around the taking notes, and I've implemented that before with just asking, hey, I'm going to jot some things down, but also pregame. Scholars, go ahead and do some pregame planning. Maybe you visit the LinkedIn for the folks that are interviewing you in advance. Do a little bit of research from that side as well, so you can bring some of that information into the interview as you need to. So good stuff. Nicole, can we squeeze in maybe two more with our distinguished panel? Do we have time for maybe two more?
I think we can.
Okay.
All right. Another question is around what happens, or how would you respond when you're asked a question in an interview and you might need some clarity around the question or just some more details before you want to answer it?
You can ask the interviewer to elaborate more, to give you more information on, so that you can properly respond to the question. There is no harm in that. You can say, can you provide, a little bit more detail about what your question is asking, so that I can make sure that I'm answering it appropriately and correctly. And so feel free to always ask that. Don't just try to start going down that path and you don't really understand fully what the question is.
I agree.
Can you put in a pin in it too and ask them to come back to that question? Has that ever happened, Shalane or Tarina, in interviews that you all have conducted, where someone said, hey, can I come back to that question a little bit later on?
No one has ever asked me that, but when people have felt like they didn't answer the question properly at the end of the question, at the end of the interview, as a recruiter, I've always said, is there anything else you'd like to share regarding your candidacy? And they've said, I want to go back to the initial, or the question that you asked me about, blah, blah, blah. And that's okay as well. It shows the interviewer that you've taken some time, you've had a little reflective moment, and you want to circle back. And that's all right.
That's great. Nicole, Dewey, I see one question I think is a really good one.
Go for it.
I want to see if we could talk about that one. There's a question on how would you address requirements that you do not fully meet for a job? That is really a good question, because there might be job postings. Now, I would say don't apply for anything that you do not meet the minimum requirements for. You don't want to do that, because it's really, you're wasting the recruiter's and interviewer's time. They're not going to select you if you don't even meet the minimum requirements. But if there are desired qualifications that they're looking for and you don't have that experience, you really want to think about transferable skills. So whether it's a really specific coding language and you don't have that one, but you have something that's similar, you can say, I'm proficient in this. I don't have that, but I learn quickly, or I plan to study that, or I'm taking that next semester, or I'm taking a course offline. Or even if it's a skill or a competency and you haven't directly worked in that area, but you've done something else that translates over well, that's all it's about, is transferring your skills. Like nobody has necessarily, most people don't have, especially in early talent roles or earlier roles in your career, you might not have everything, and they're just putting a wish list. This is what they'd like in the candidates, but you might have bits and pieces, or 75% or 80% of that. Speak to what you actually do have, those skills, but also talk about how some of the other skills you have translate into this role.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm keeping an eye on the clock here and certainly don't want to keep folks longer than the time that we've allotted for today. So Nicole, thank you for masterfully walking us through the Q&A. And Tarina and Shalane, thank you so much for the information that you shared. The scholars are interested in whether or not we have access to the playback of this, so we'll talk about that in a moment, and then how to access a copy of the deck, which we'll touch on as well. I do want to give you all another 30 seconds, though. Any bonus things that you want to add on or closing thoughts? Scholars may be starting to do interviews or maybe getting prepared for things. Maybe share a closing thought. This was a little bit off script, but I want to give you all space on this. We've got such great content today.
Great.
Well, I'll start first. I will say that your confidence is something that can't be taught. So you have to go into this like being confident in yourself first. And I know it's normal to be nervous or anxious, but you have to know that your confidence speaks volumes about who you are as a candidate and how teachable and trainable you are for that organization. So as I mentioned earlier, you could be confidently wrong, just be confident. And just know yourself and know what value you're bringing to the table. And that should resonate through all the questions that you answer.
All right, Tarina, thank you so much for that. Is it okay for the scholars to connect with you on LinkedIn after today's broadcast?
Of course, absolutely.
Right. Wonderful, wonderful. All right, Shalane, bring us home. Closing thought, my friend.
I will touch on, Tarina said earlier, smile. That comes across through the phone, in person. You always want to bring that positive energy and you want to give off that aura. You spend so many hours at work. You want to be likable. You want to work with people that other people like and like to work with. You want to exude confidence, but also exude that you're approachable, that you're coachable, that you're eager to learn, that you're intellectually curious, that you're going to probe and you're there for growth. And you don't know it all and you don't have an arrogant aura about you, but you want to learn, you want to bring and just continue to grow. So I say bring the positivity, bring the fact that you want to learn and you want the opportunity and bring that enthusiasm.
Very good. Shalane Colbert, everybody. Shalane, same request there. Is it okay for scholars to reach out to you after today's discussion to continue, maybe if they didn't get a chance to address their question today?
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
All right. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, again, Nicole, thank you so much for your leadership. And we'll go to our closing slides here and promise to get everybody out in the next 2 minutes or less if we can. But just some brief reminders that we're going to be sharing. Certainly want to talk a little bit about our upcoming webinars that are right around the corner. So pretty excited about the Beyond College webinar series and everything that's happening. Obviously, we've now completed 4 so far. So today's session will be available on demand via the API Scholars YouTube channel. Give us 72 hours or so, and then we'll have access to that information for you, and that will be available. You see the full roster of events coming up. We've got some great discussions happening here throughout the remainder of the year. I'm really going to ask everyone to circle and highlight the session that we have coming up on July the 29th. This is our career and internships discussion. Please, scholars, you must join this one because this is how you make preparation for next summer. We're going to be talking during that important session about opportunities for the summer of 2022. So please make sure that you get involved early in those kinds of sessions. And again, all of these are available. A special shout out to our buddy Barbara Scotland and the team who help us out with these wonderful events to get you all registered and connected in and to submit questions to us in advance. Final reminders here, you've got our wonderful survey. You can reference this. We'll also send the survey details out with our playback. Take a moment for us. Give us 2 minutes when that comes into your inbox. Fill out the survey for us. Give us feedback about the things that you enjoyed today. Was it the session the right length? Do we need to go longer? Do we need to truncate areas? Do we need to make other adjustments? Just go ahead and complete that survey for us. Very, very important for us to take that feedback. We will review the information and in turn use that as we build out additional sessions. And then our second to the last slide is just to focus on, again, some of the key action items for you. So please go ahead and get connected into our university programs page. Join the talent community. This is a one-stop shop where you can learn all about career opportunities within our institution. And the team does a great job of proactively sharing information there. So join that community. And of course, be on there looking for roles, either from a full-time perspective or internship opportunities that may be coming in the days ahead. Certainly want to shout out again tuition funding sources as well. A great resources, an aggregator of sorts that gives you access to all kinds of scholarships. So please visit the tuition funding sources website and you can get lots of great information there. We also partner with TFS for the distribution of our reminders and content relative to students. So special shout out to the TFS team. And of course, Beyond College, as we've referenced before, we've got 4 down team and 8 more to go between now and November. And so with that said, again, I want to thank Tarina for all the great information you shared. Shalane, thank you as well. Again, huge kudos to the API Scholars team, to Nicole and to Katrina and to Noel and all of the partners behind the scenes. And we've also got other great partners like Andrea Vienna and also Ashley Rasmussen and others from our team that are just adding great value. And again, I mentioned Barbara Scotland earlier, so we'll shout her out here one more time. So with that said, everyone continue to stay safe. Please join us again on April the 22nd. This is all about Teach Children to Save Month in April. So we're going to have a great discussion with our partners, Bonnie Wallace and others, around the topic of budgeting and money management 101. Go ahead and get registered now. Share the information with others that may want to join. Everyone, please stay safe. Hope that you're enjoying the start of your spring here. If there are additional questions that we can answer for you, please don't hesitate to contact us. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and we'll see you next time around. Have a good one, everybody. Take care.